I'm Dana Searles, and welcome to This Week in Iowa Politics on We Are Iowa Plus. The final gavel officially fell for the 2026 legislative session. Lawmakers worked into the weekend last week for a marathon of 34 hours to pass all their priorities. In the final hours, lawmakers pushed through a number of policy bills, but the holdup all session long was with property tax relief. Well, lawmakers finally came to an agreement. You might remember there were three different proposals going around this session. One from Governor Reynolds, one from House Republicans, and one from Senate Republicans. Ultimately, lawmakers agreed on a proposal that includes aspects of all three bills. So here is what is in that final proposal now on the governor's desk. The bill caps local government revenue growth at just 2%, with exceptions for new construction. It also includes a 10% homestead tax exemption up to $20,000, and that would be adjusted for inflation. The bill also shifts some education costs to the state general fund, allowing school districts to lower property tax levies. And ultimately, lawmakers say this bill will cut property taxes by $4 billion over the next 6 years. And while property taxes were front of mind, a long list of other bills made it through, while others failed. Here's a breakdown of which notable bills we've been covering that made it through and which ones did not. A long list of bills are awaiting the governor's signature after working nearly 2 weeks of overtime. So here's what made it through, starting with bills impacting your health. The biggest bill on the governor's desk is the bill known as the Make America Healthy Again bill. Now, it adds restrictions to what SNAP recipients can buy with their benefits, preventing them from buying unhealthy foods like candy and soda. It also bans certain food dyes from schools, limits screen time for certain students, adds more physical education, and allows Iowans to buy ivermectin over the counter. Other bills passing include $25 million allocated to Central Iowa Water Works to upgrade its nitrate removal facility, requiring new homes being built in the state to install passive radon mitigation systems, an increase in taxes on vape products to allocate that money towards pediatric cancer research, a bill that expands access to subacute mental health care, removing the 10-day limit on care, requirements for a parent to approve a minor getting the HPV vaccine, and finally, a bill that adds restrictions to abortion medication like mifepristone. The bill requires people seeking abortion medication to see a doctor in person and get an exam. Up next is funding bills. On top of property taxes, lawmakers addressed other policies that could impact your wallet. First, lawmakers passed a proposed amendment to the Constitution. The amendment would require a supermajority vote in the legislature in order to raise the state's income tax. Now, in order to change Iowa's Constitution, lawmakers must pass the bill for 2 consecutive sessions. Then, Iowans will vote in the November election. Lawmakers passed this proposal last year and this year, meaning now it is in the hands of Iowans. Also passing this session that saw back and forth is a premium tax increase on health maintenance organizations. The tax rate for HMOs will go up from 0.925% to 3.5%. The goal is to make up a Medicaid budget shortfall. Meanwhile, a handful of Republican tough-on-crime bills passed as well. A bill on the governor's desk would implement a 3-strike system, meaning 3-time felony offenders would face at least 7 years in prison. Then, passing through with unanimous support is a bill that would make animal torture a felony. And finally, a bill on the governor's desk would ban warrant resolution clinics in the state. That's something Polk County Attorney Kimberly Graham opposed. And finally, a slew of policy bills made it through this session that fall under multiple categories. First, at the beginning of session, Governor Reynolds signed a bill that bans local governments from implementing civil rights protections broader than Iowa code. This came after a handful of city councils looked to add protections for transgender or non-binary Iowans, despite Iowa code not including those protections. Also passing is a bill requiring public employees to use the E-Verify or SAVE system to confirm work authorization. Some other bills on Reynolds' desk include a bill limiting the governor's emergency powers, requiring English-only tests for commercial driver's licenses, requiring Iowa HHS to verify immigration status for SNAP and WIC recipients, and allowing foster parents to raise a child consistent with their beliefs. And while many bills did pass, there were a number of bills that did not make it through. First, a bill a lot of farmers had their eyes on was the right to repair bill. It would require agricultural equipment manufacturers to make their software, data, tools, and parts available to other dealers and independent farmers at fair and reasonable costs. Also not moving forward, a bill implementing dress code requirements in public schools, banning DEI offices in private universities, allowing firearms in vehicles on school grounds, an increase in Iowa's tobacco tax, and the effort to bring the Chicago Bears to Iowa also came to an end. Lawmakers also looked to expand a current law that bans materials related to gender identity and sexual orientation. Lawmakers wanted to expand those restrictions to all K-12 students. That bill ultimately failed. Meanwhile, a years-long battle for Iowa landowners will continue. Also not moving forward is a bill banning the use of eminent domain for building carbon capture pipelines. And with all of these bills that did pass now on the governor's desk, Governor Reynolds has 30 days to sign a bill into law. Now, Governor Reynolds did weigh in after that final gavel fell, saying she is proud of the work accomplished, adding in part, quote, "Throughout my time in office, the common sense conservative policies we've enacted will ensure our state remains strong, prosperous, and vibrant for generations to come. That has been my commitment to Iowans since day one, and I will continue to serve with that same purpose during my final months in office." House Republicans also released a statement saying, in part, all session, House Republicans stayed, dug into the issues, and worked hard to keep our word to our constituents. I am incredibly proud of our caucus for the work they've done this session to represent the interests of all 99 counties. Meanwhile, Senate Democrats said at the end of session, quote, "Republican lawmakers spent the year wreaking havoc on Iowans' lives, but now Iowans can finally breathe a sigh of relief. As the legislative session ends, so does the harm. We could have worked together. Unfortunately, these opportunities were few and far between." Well, turning our attention to election season, we are less than 1 month away from the June primaries, and our candidate coverage continues this week with Iowa's open U.S. Senate seat. It is the first time this seat is open in about a dozen years. So this week, I sat down with Jim Carlin, who is Republican candidate for U.S. Senate. He shared with me some of his top priorities and what he is hearing from Iowans on the campaign trail. Jim Carlin, Republican candidate for U.S. Senate. Thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
So start off by telling me we are less than 1 month away from the primaries officially.
It's almost here.
How is the campaign going? How are you feeling?
I feel really good. I mean, there's a lot of good metrics. We're getting a lot of really good feedback. I think we'll be in all 99 counties. Next week, we'll have been to all 99 counties. And we're getting some traction out there. I think our message is connecting and people get it. You know, they understand why we're running and they understand the necessity of it.
Tell me about why you've been running, why you decided to run.
Well, I think it comes down to this. I think the government is on the wrong side of the economics of all of us. And what I mean by that is, if you look at the government's role in the cost of housing, the cost of health care, the cost of student loans, and then kind of, you know, looking the other way on the regulation side where it's affecting the agriculture, market concentration in agriculture and banking, a lot of things. And the government really needs to step up in a couple ways. It needs to deregulate markets, to open them back up, to have a free market model that works for us. And it has to watch how much money it's actually costing us in its policies and inflation and taxation.
All right, so tell me, what have you been hearing from voters on the campaign trail?
I think right now, obviously, they're concerned about the price of gas. But farmers right now are facing one of the toughest years they've ever had. Young families that want to buy a house, it's a pretty daunting challenge. And college-age people looking at student loan costs, and you know, they're way out of this world expensive with really high interest that's compounded. And you know, I think we all feel the bite from what's happened to the cost of health care in the last few years. It's gone up by 200% since Obamacare. So all of those things collectively are making it pretty hard on some folks.
And let's talk about your top priorities, you know, running for U.S. Senate. What are some of your top priorities, and how do you kind of align
what voters are telling you and how you would plan to
Sure.
address that.
Well, I think one of the main things we have to do is make sure our dollar is stable. That means we do have to watch how much money we spend, maybe even talk about balancing the budget again or capping the money supply. But, you know, one of the things that needs to get some play and we need to look at is having something actually back the value of a dollar. And, you know, I'd be open to looking at a return to gold and silver-backed currency, or Vivek Ramaswamy referred to it as a basket of commodities. Something real backing the value of our dollar, because we saw so much inflation in the last 3 or 4 years. If you're a senior on a fixed income, that really hurts you. I think we need to secure the border and our sovereignty. I think we need to finish the wall, and I think we need to pass the SAVE Act. And I think we need to restore free markets. When there's free markets, we have a voice and a choice. Lower prices and quality usually goes up because it's incentivized.
Let's talk about your first priority that you listed off, a lot of economic policies.
Right.
What about your experience and actions that you've taken as state senator? How would you kind of use some of those actions and take that to Washington and really make those changes and implement these, addressing these economic
Absolutely,
issues?
no. When I was in the Senate, they made me the Senate Veterans Affairs Chair. And I'm also a trial lawyer, and I've learned over time that if you want to know what the truth is, look at the money side of things, because that usually will take you down the right path. Well, I looked into the Veterans Trust Fund, $30 million at the time. The interest from the $30 million was supposed to go to veterans in need. So I asked, okay, how much interest are you getting our boys and our ladies? They said 0.8%. Like, what? Why so little? Didn't really have an explanation. I went to the state treasurer and I'm like, you manage IPERS. You're getting them between 8 and 10%. Why can't you get the veterans that? She came back to me a couple days later and she said, we can do that. And 2 years later, that's the law in Iowa. So now it generates about 10 times the revenue. And when you have Social Security only paying out 1.5% interest, that, when you're a senior, you're going to want that around. Well, I don't know why federal employees can invest their money by putting it into a fixed index fund that they're happy with, and the average American senior who pays about the same between the employer and their side of it, why can't they do the same thing? I think they should be able to. They should have that option. They'd have a lot more money.
Let's go into one of your next priorities. You talked about immigration in the state Senate. You voted to ban sanctuary cities.
I did.
I know you talked about that before. Is that something you would want to look to bring it to the federal level? I'll start with my first question there.
Sure. I do think we need to ban sanctuary cities because ICE needs to do its job. ICE is trying to do a very difficult job. They are going after felons and criminals, and we have seen horrible instances of crime come across our border. And if you don't know who's coming across the border, what do you really know? The first duty of government is to protect us. That's the first duty of government. And as I was in the military, it's just a bad idea to not defend your borders, to not know who's coming across. So I would be in favor of finishing the wall and getting that done as quickly as we can, because during the Biden administration, some estimates say 20 million illegal aliens crossed our borders. But here's another number people need to know. 60% are estimated to receive some form of federal government assistance, which the people of this country have to pay for. That's not really fair. We need a process that isn't so hard for people to get citizenship, but we have to have rules, and our sovereignty has to be respected.
And reforms to ICE was a major holdup in the House and the Senate in terms of reopening the Department of Homeland Security recently. If you were in the Senate, how would you have handled that situation in terms of trying to reopen the Department of Homeland Security, bring that funding, pay TSA workers, but there is a holdup and you do need Democratic support? How would you kind of handle that situation?
Well, what was the holdup? I think it was tied to the extending the Obamacare subsidy, which the Obamacare subsidy kind of got us to where we are in some respects, because You know, if you want health insurance right now, it's 200 to 300% more than it was when Obamacare was created. It didn't make health insurance affordable. It created a monopoly where the consumers don't have a voice on price. And right now, health insurance companies are practicing medicine without a license. Doctors aren't getting the tests that they want to do their assessments. I don't see a lot of upside there for the American people. I think we need to go back to a free market model where you and me define the coverage that we want with how healthy we are, and not mandate that insurance companies must cover all pre-existing conditions, which forced a lot of carriers out of the market.
And then you talk about, I want to also talk about the war in Iran right now. You talked about that very first thing with, people are feeling the pinch at the pump.
Sure.
Farmers are feeling the impact on their fertilizer. A lot of people are feeling the impacts right now. How would you handle navigating the war in Iran, and would you support the president's actions? And how would you kind of assure to Iowans that these economic pressures are going to go away, if that's what you would believe?
Well, the thing is, the economic pressure that's on Iran right now is far, far, far worse than the economic pressure that's on us. So they're not getting any oil out of their country. Their entire economy subsists on that. We don't need to put troops on the ground. I think President Trump's strategy was a very good approach to resolving this. When you have a country that has enriched uranium, 450 kilograms, ballistic missile capabilities, and is the world's leading sponsor of terror, as much as we don't want to do it, he saw the need that we have to. And I am very optimistic that a deal will be made, that prices at the pump will be going down. And I don't think that we're going to be that far away from it, honestly.
What would you say to an Iowan who is maybe frustrated right now, struggling to fill up their gas tank to get to work? What would you say to them with how that's kind of being handled?
I would say this. Remember the guy who got you the cheap gas the last time? It was President Trump. He opened up the oil reserves. He got the price down of gas substantially when he was president. He did that initially prior to this war. He's going to do it again. And sometimes there's short-term pain for long-term gain. And I think, and I'm very optimistic that we will get there, that the prices at the pump are going to be going down. And hopefully that'll be sooner rather than later.
Coming up, my interview with Jim Carlin continues. I ask him why he strongly aligns with President Trump's effort of Make America Great Again and what sets him apart in the race. That's just ahead. In the next part of my interview with Republican candidate for U.S. Senate Jim Carlin, I ask him about his confident stance in the Make America Great Again movement and why Iowans should vote for him instead of his challengers. So here's what he had to say.
You probably a lot of your campaign in furthering the MAGA agenda. That would kind of be a lot of your goals going into the Senate. Why do you feel like that's important to point out to voters?
Well, America hasn't been put first. And that's a real thing. And when you look at what's happened to our industrial strength since the 1970s, our manufacturing base got shipped overseas. That weakened us economically to where we became, the world's greatest debtor nation. President Trump has tried to reverse that course. He wants our boundaries respected, our sovereignty respected, and he wants to restore the economic strength and power of the United States. And I think he has a long-term vision to restore America's economic potential and greatness.
I want to ask too about going forward in this campaign. What does the next stops look like? And how are you, what are you saying to voters in the coming weeks ahead?
Well, what I'm saying is this. If you look at my resume, look at the work I did in the State House, working on a senior property tax freeze, writing the active shooter bill for all Iowa's public and private schools, getting the Veterans Trust Fund I exposed elder abuse at the Iowa Veterans Home. The body of work and the things that I did speak to the kind of representation Iowans would get I have fought to defend the private property rights of Iowa's farmers very vigorously with friends since I left the State House. I fought for the medical freedom of all Iowans when COVID was going on. And I'm somebody who's genuinely, authentically going to represent them. Ashley Hinson, about 70% of her campaign money comes from out of the state. About 96 or 97% of the money that I raise for my campaign comes from right here in Iowa. And so they can count on me to stand up for them.
And how would you ensure that Iowans' voices are being heard all the way from, rural Iowa up to Washington, D.C.?
You have to keep your ears to the ground and close to the people you serve. And when I was a trial lawyer, I got to know my clients very well. And it's your job to advocate the case of Iowans, whether they're farmers or seniors or young families that want to own a home. You have to take the realities and make the case for change by knowing their realities, articulating them, and then coming up with some viable solutions to correct those problems.
What are some of the issues that we haven't talked about that you do want to talk about and that you do have, a lot of motivation to address?
I think, we talked briefly about passing the SAVE Act. We do need economic security. We also really need auditing. Like DOJ was a start, but $500 billion is being spent by the Veterans Administration. That was their projected budget. And you have a lot of veterans waiting for diagnostic workups or qualifying for disability. So if you're spending that kind of money, why are we getting that result? If we're putting this much money into Medicare and into Social Security, why are seniors not having prescription drug costs, out-of-pocket prescription drug costs covered? Why is that? Why are they being asked to pick up so much of the cost of their health care after they paid into it for 40 years? Those are a couple things. And I think they're solvable problems if we invest the money wisely and we're careful about how it's spent and who it's going to.
Is there money you think is, being overinvested right now? How would you kind of reallocate that money that's being overinvested?
Well, I think we need to look at this like an audit and transparency will tell us where the money is really going. I would be in favor of auditing the Federal Reserve because the Federal Reserve's role in housing since COVID, we saw the price of a house go up 45%. A lot of that was due to the monetary policies of the Federal Reserve. So when things are impacting regular everyday people that much, there needs to be transparency, there needs to be accountability. Obamacare, they said it was the medical cost loss ratio as the justification for raising the premium so much. Well, the reality is their profits went up 200% and 300% while they're saying it's the cost. So we need to have authentic, transparent audits and accountability of where the money's going.
You are running for the primary against Ashley Hinson, somebody in this state who has a lot of name recognition, being a current representative. How do you differentiate yourself from Ashley Mishra? And how do you plan to kind of navigate going up against that name recognition?
Well, she has name recognition in Northeast Iowa. Because I've been around the state as much as I have, you'd be surprised. A lot of people in Northwest Iowa and Southwest Iowa and even Southeast Iowa are not that familiar with her. They don't really know where she has stood on some issues. They didn't know that 70% of her money came from out of the state. And she voted to send about $130 billion to the Ukraine. While our own borders are being overrun, that's about 10 aircraft carriers worth of money, if you want to know. And the eminent domain CO2 pipeline issue is a big deal to a lot of farmers. They want their private property rights respected. One of Ashley's biggest donors was the man who leads that charge to take away private property rights of Iowa's farmers. And that makes it very real to them and very personal to them. And they notice that stuff.
Where do you stand on eminent domain?
Eminent domain has its place when there's a compelling public interest. This isn't one of those instances. The case hasn't been made to justify it, and it is a private sector company infringing on the private property rights of Iowa's farmers. A lot of people recognize this. A lot of my former Senate colleagues, the guy who replaced me in the Iowa Senate, Kevin Alonso, has led in that effort. So they know about it, and we need to pay attention to it because private property rights are a boundary that should be stood for.
Is there an instance where you do think it's warranted eminent domain?
Oh, sure. No,
Well,
I mean,
what does that kind of look like?
well, no, I mean, if there's a legitimate, compelling public purpose that says we have to take possession of this land for some compelling reason, whatever that reason may be, if it's putting up a brand new highway, across the state, or something like that, where there's a legitimate, compelling public use or purpose, then those are instances where it is appropriate. That's why we have it. But when you haven't made the case that lowering the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere is going to be done, and to what end, I've read studies that say that it's negligible. So to invest that kind of taxpayer money in a tax credit and then to infringe on the private property rights of Iowa's farmers isn't something I can get behind. I actually met a couple the other day that it's happened to them against their will. And they're not happy about it because, the contractors are coming in and they're acting like they own their land. A lot of people feel this. Your land is your freedom, and they want that respected and understood.
If you are elected as the Republican primary candidate in this race, you would be up against either Zach Walz or Josh Turk, both currently in the state legislature. What would that look like from your perspective? How would you navigate that race, and what would you set apart in that race?
Sure.
What set yourself apart in that
Well,
race? Excuse me.
I met Josh the other day, enjoyed meeting him. I served with Zach. I know Zach pretty well. I think there's one issue we all understand, whether you're right or left, and this is one of my main things I'm going to work on. Our government is causing a lot of economic hardship on us, on housing, on health care, and on student loan debt. Those are three big expenses. Well, unfortunately for Democrats, President Obama authored Obamacare that got us where we are right now in health care. And President Obama authorized federalization of all student loans. He didn't make them affordable. They doubled the principal, they doubled the interest, and they compound the interest. So on average, it takes 15 to 25 years to pay off a 4-year college degree. I met a lady today, actually a news person just like you. She paid $10,000 in interest on her student loans, and only some of it was tax deductible. That's not acceptable. That's debt servitude. And our government isn't supposed to be facilitating debt servitude. It's supposed to keep us free. And we're not doing a very good job of that right now.
How would you brought up student loans, I guess revisiting that, how would you plan to maybe bring some relief to student loan borrowers?
You need to take it out of the hands of the federal government. That was a bad idea. And the reason why it was a bad idea, colleges and universities raised the tuition as much as they wanted to because the federal government told them we're going to guarantee the loan. So here's what happens. They raise the tuition. It's now double what it was, right? And then they sell the student loan debt because it's non-dischargeable. It becomes like investment paper. And that has resulted in really high interest rates that are compounded. And there's about $1.7 trillion in student loan debt out there right now. It's not the federal government overseeing it. They have hired private sector companies to do it, and they are not particularly friendly to our kids when they have to pay $700, $800, $900 a month, and they're trying to buy a house. They're trying to pay for health insurance. And I think the Democrats are on the wrong side of those things.
So who should oversee these student loans?
I think the best people to oversee student loans are the people who take them out. They don't have any choice. They need a choice and a voice because, it's basic free market economics. The more lenders that are out there, the more options they have. There's more competition for the interest rates and not compounding the interest, which they have, to give them some semblance of economic control back, instead of student loans being a take it or leave it proposition where you're going to have to pay interest that you may not want to pay, and it's going to be compounded even if you don't want to, and worst of all, it's non-dischargeable. You can't get out of it. Only under extreme circumstances can you get out of a student loan. That is not serving our young college graduates. I think it's disincentivizing getting a higher education, and I think it's hurting them in a big, big way.
We talked about a lot of different issues here. So I guess, and to, kind of wrap up this interview, going ahead in the next few weeks, what is kind of your final pitch to Iowans before the June primaries?
Well, it comes down to this. I don't think you're being represented. I don't think you're being represented well. I'm a lawyer. I know when somebody's being represented, and I know when they're not. And I don't think the interests, the economic interests of seniors, working families, young people who want to go to college, those interests are not being defended and respected and advocated for in a real way. And it is really hurting them. And I'm very concerned about preserving the American dream for my grandkids. I think a lot of people that are older, we start looking and asking ourselves, what does my grandson and my granddaughter's future look like 20 years from now? Well, we got to get on the field and fight for them now. We can't wait. We have to be more visionary and more intentional about planning out a vision for their economic security, and we need to do it now.
Awesome. Anything else you want to add?
No.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me,
Appreciate it.
Dana. Appreciate it.
And as we continue interviewing candidates leading up to the midterm primaries, you can watch the full interviews right here on We Are Iowa Plus. You can find all of those interviews under the state politics category. Well, coming up, the vice president made a stop in Iowa. The campaign message he sent while campaigning for Congressman Zach Nunn in his competitive race with major national implications. Vice President J.D. Vance came to Iowa to campaign with Congressman Zach Nunn. Now, Nunn is in a competitive midterm race for Iowa's 3rd congressional district. It's a race the entire country is watching, with majority implications on the line in the U.S. House. Now, at the event, J.D. Vance and Zach Nunn focused on American manufacturing and farming, both taking aim at China, claiming the country stole from the U.S. and its manufacturing companies. Now, Vance saying he will enact tariffs on countries stealing jobs from Americans, claiming countries like China are using slave labor to shut Iowa companies down.
But if you're a foreign country dumping that garbage into our country, if you're trying to undercut the wages of Iowa workers, if you're trying to steal the jobs from Iowa farmers and Iowa manufacturers, you know what you're going to do? You're going to pay a big fat tariff before you bring anything into our country, because we're protecting the jobs of our workers and our people for a change.
Then in Nunn's introduction of Vance, he referred to him as his wingman, emphasizing their success with the Farm Bill and also celebrating a bill being taken up on the House floor that would allow the sale of year-round E15. All of this came while driving home their message about American manufacturing and farming.
We're working to make sure that Washington knows that what's made in places like Iowa, what's grown in places like Iowa, not only feed and fuel the world, they're a reflection of our next generation.
In a statement after the event, Nunn's Democratic challenger, Sarah Trone-Garriott, weighed in, saying in part, quote, Zach Nunn has voted with party leaders like J.D. Vance and special interests to close health care clinics in Ottumwa and South Des Moines, while raising costs on everything from health care to gas and groceries for Iowa's families. Well, that wraps up another very busy week in Iowa politics, so let's look ahead to what we are tracking next week. Our candidate coverage continues as the countdown to the midterm primaries is on. So next week, I'm sitting down with Republican gubernatorial candidate Zach Lane to hear from him on his top priorities and what sets him apart in the crowded Republican primary. We'll have that and much more next week on This Week in Iowa Politics. Thank you all for watching on We Are Iowa Plus. I'm Dana Searles. Have a great day.